Hello YouTube and welcome to the channel. Now then, we are going off on a little bit of a tangent today. You may remember in the previous video I mentioned that Lidl and Aldi here in the UK were doing cheap Airfix starter kits, and I mentioned to you that if you saved up the flying hours off the box, you could send them off to Models for Heroes and they would then use them. They're a charity, by the way. They would then use them to get free kits to dish out to veterans to help with mental health issues. So I couldn't mention all that without actually putting my money where my mouth is and going and buying some. So that's exactly what I did. I nipped down, I think it was Lidl, went and picked myself up a few kits, and with the night drawing in now here in the UK, it's bloody dark at 4 o'clock. There's virtually no time to do any RCing outside, so it's indoor hobbies only at the moment. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to try and build this. It's a hunting Percival jet Provost T.4. Now, I haven't built a model aeroplane in about 10, 15 years possibly. I used to be a massive modeler as a kid, and then I got into the hobby again a few years ago, and I made hundreds of models, and then all of a sudden I stopped and haven't made one since. So this will be the first one I've done for a good 10, 15 years. Now, I've never ever done an Airfix starter set either. I always look down on them a little bit because they come with acrylic paints, and if I remember right, the last time I used acrylic paints was as a kid, and it was just a horrible gloopy mess, and it just looked awful, so I never bothered again. I always used all the enamels. But what I'm going to do today is obviously going to make this, and I'm going to only use the paints, the brush and the poly cement that come in the kit. So we're going to make it, we're only going to use the bits and pieces that come in the kit, nothing else. I'm going to use a few tools like some files and some snips, of course, to get the parts off the sprues. But I'm going to see if you can make a decent job of one of these starter kits. I'm even going to use a poly cement. Normally I would have used super glue because I could never be bothered to wait for the cement to dry, but we're going to do it by the book. We're going to get this thing open, and we're going to make ourselves a model of a hunting Percival jet Provost. Right then, let's dive in and see what we get in the box. Like I say, I've never ever made one of these starter kits. I was never much of an Airfix fan, actually. I was more of a Matchbox man myself. It was a kid. Oh, right, we've got our paints there. Looks like 4 colours and a tube of cement. We've got our destructions with some decals. Obviously, they're little water transfers. Let's have a look what else. Now then, I don't know if this is new tooling by Airfix, but I don't recall them ever doing a jet Provost in the lineup. So it looks fairly crisp, actually. So it might well be that this is new tooling. I know that Matchbox used to do one. Whether or not this is the same tooling, I don't know. But this does look quite crisp, and actually it looks quite detailed on first impressions. Let's get it out of the bag and have a look. Right, first impressions of this kit. And I'm going to stick my neck out and say I think this is genuinely new tooling, because everything seems really crisp and well moulded. There's not, as far as I can tell, there's next to no flash on any of the components. So this is a lot better than the Airfix kits I remember. Also, the instructions are nice and detailed, and they've also got painting instructions as well on each part. So big thumbs up to Airfix there, because this does seem a lot better than I remember. But anyway, I did pick the jet Provost because basically it's all red, so it should be quite straightforward to do. So anyway, I'm going to get my brush out, get some water out, get the paints out, and we're going to have a go at painting one of these. I tell you what, every time I do anything like this, it takes me straight back to being a kid. I absolutely loved making model airplanes when I was growing up. I was absolutely obsessed with aircraft and always wanted to join the RAF. Now, I am quite pleasantly surprised at how well this paint is going on. I mean, considering I'm brush painting it, it seems to be going on okay. Now, the only thing that's worrying me at the moment is that I appear to only have half a pot, but it does seem to go reasonably far, so hopefully there's enough here to do the whole thing. It does look as though it might need another coat, but whether or not I'll have enough paint to do that, I don't know. But I shall continue on painting the fuselage in red. Right, that's pretty much all the red portions of the plane painted, and I'm happy to report that there is more than enough paint in these little pots to do, I'd say, even a second coat. I've hardly used any of the paint at all, actually, so it does go quite a long way. The only issue I've found is that in some areas of the fuselage, well, there's some areas of the various bits and pieces, there must be some sort of a releasing agent on it, and obviously this is water based, so if it meets a little bit of oil, it sort of marbles in effect. But if you keep brushing over it a few times, it does tend to disappear, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Like I say, it probably needs another coat, but so far it's going on pretty well, actually. I'm quite impressed at how reasonable the paint is. It's not the same as using enamel, but I tell you what, it's not bad at all. I don't know whether the formulation's changed, or when I used it as a kid it just wasn't very good, but it does seem to go on a lot better than I remembered. Next up, I'm going to do the black portions, see how we get on with that, and then we'll start with the silver and well, it's number 64 grey. So anyway, black portions. Now then, I finished putting the black paint on the black parts. I've also put some of the silver paint on the various bits and pieces that need to be silver. I have read the instructions, and it does say that you're supposed to wash the sprues before you start painting them. That'll be why I kept getting little oily spots everywhere, but it really wasn't much of a problem anyway. I don't know how long this paint takes to dry, but I think I'm going to leave it overnight before I put a second coat on the red, because it still feels slightly tacky. But with it being acrylic, you haven't got to wait the 8 hours or so it takes for... Is it 8 hours? Sure it's something like daft like that. Yeah, 8 hours before the enamel's dry, so this does dry pretty quick. So if you're a little bit short on patience, these are the paints for you. But so far so good. Everything, you know, I've got no complaints. I'm not going to paint the pilots because it would really do me head in that I couldn't put a flesh tone on the faces and that, so I'm going to leave the pilots out of it, and we're just going to concentrate on the bits that we've got colours for. But like I say, so far so good. I'm quite impressed with this. Right then, day two, I let all the portions of the fuselage dry overnight, and then this morning, the very first thing, I put a second coat on. I needn't have worried about the amount of paint that you get in those little pots, because there's more than enough to do a second coat. I mean, there's even, I reckon, enough to do a third if you were really struggling. But the second coat is pretty much covered. Well, it's really, really nice coverage, to be honest, and I don't think you'd need any more than that. The black has dried nicely. I've made my first error though. I've painted the actual instrument binnacle black where it should be sort of that, was it number 64, is it? Yeah, number 64 grey, like an interior grey. So I'm going to paint that grey and all the other interior bits and pieces that need to be painted in number 64. I'm going to do that now. Right, I finished painting all the grey bits. I think what I'm going to do now is start to assemble the actual cockpit. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of detail using the silver. I'm going to dry brush some of the silver onto the black detailed areas of the seats, etc., just to give it a bit of depth. Dry brushing is dead easy if you've never done it before. Basically, I'll show you in a minute anyway. You just get the brush, you get a tiny little bit of whatever colour it is you're going to dry brush on, wipe the majority of it off, and then just gently, virtually with a dry brush, brush the pigment onto the various portions, and it really does bring out the detail. And like I say, it's not cheating because I'm still using all the same paints. I'm not adding anything to the kit itself, but it really does make a big difference, and it just gives you that extra next level of detail. Right, for the dry brushing, I'm going to be using silver on some of the black interior portions of the cockpit. So I've taken a little bit of the silver pigment on my brush. I'm going to wipe the vast majority of it off on this bit of tissue. I'm going to get the corresponding part that we wish to dry brush, and you just literally just sort of gently tickle the various details, and it just makes them pop, basically, for want of a better word. So if you brush them on, there we go, very lightly, not too much because you can overdo it. and it just gives that sort of worn metallic look to things, you know. Like I say, you can overdo it. I think that's about it, really. So it literally just makes the interior, you probably can't see on the camera, unfortunately, but it just brings the detail to life. Just if you do the edges of things where you might get a bit of wear and tear, just makes it look a little bit more realistic. Anyway, I'm going to cut some of these bits and pieces off now, and we're going to start assembling the actual cockpit itself. So to get some of these smaller parts off the sprues cleanly, you should really use a pair of little sprue snips. I did have a pair, but like everything in this house, they've wandered off, never to be seen again. I do, however, I have got a Stanley knife. It's a little bit overkill. You've got to be ever so careful with it. But I got them off using a Stanley knife. There is a little bit of flash on these bits, which I'm going to have to get rid of. And I have pinched a nail file off the wife. She won't miss it. To remove some of this excess flash, and once we've done that, we can actually glue them together. Now, I did say I normally would use, or years ago used super glue, not on the canopy though. I always hated using this poly cement stuff because I used to find it went everywhere. But I said I'm going to do this by the book. We're going to make this with all the bits and pieces. So I'm going to try poly cement for the first time in God knows how many years. So anyway, I'll get these little bits and pieces for the seats filed down, and then we'll see about gluing them together. Right, there are the two halves of the ejector seats fitted together, and I tell you what, it really does make you realise how bad your eyesight is getting since the last time you did something like this. So like I say, for me it must be about 10 years. I didn't realise how bad my eyes have got until I tried to put these tiny little pieces together. I used the poly cement on the end of a cocktail stick just as I could sort of dab it onto the area I wanted. Like I say, remember years ago when I tried to do it as a kid, used to get it absolutely everywhere, and when I moved over to super glue it was a lot easier. But we'll leave them to dry for a little while, and then we've actually got the actual seats themselves to put in, and then we'll just touch them up with a bit of black, put a little tiny bit of the silver dry brush over them, and we'll leave them to sit for a while before we start to assemble the actual cockpit itself. I've gone ahead and assembled the cockpit interior. I've dry brushed various bits and pieces just to bring out the detail. It was a good job I spotted that the instrument binnacle was the wrong colour, because if it was black, the decal that I put on wouldn't show up hardly at all. I've just dotted some red paint around just to give the impression of switches, and I've put a bit of red paint on the top of these. I think they're ejector seat handles, so I've just put a bit of red paint on top of them, just to added bit of detail really. Now the next step is to attach the bulkhead, and we've got to remove the fuselage halves from the sprues and put the cockpit into the actual fuselage itself. Right, I've glued the cockpit into one half of the fuselage, and I've also put some nose weights in the front. It does say in the instructions 2.5 grams. I'm hoping that's 2.5 grams there. I can't quite be sure. I've tried weighing it on the scales downstairs, but it's too light for it to pick it up. So I've had to sort of guesstimate that should be enough. Now I have run into a little issue. I had to do quite a lot of sanding to get to the two halves of the fuselage to sort of fit together. I've had to sand quite a lot of the interior cockpit sidewall off, if you like, before they'll clamp together. Also, I've noticed that when I was manhandling the paint on the fuselage, it's gone quite dull. It does remain a little bit tacky, this acrylic paint does. I've stuck the fuselage halves together and put the rudder and the tailplane on. They were a superb fit. I have noticed a little problem with the moulding on the wings. If you have a look underneath, there's a portion of this wing, so the lower half of the wing hasn't been moulded properly, and it's same on the other side really. Got a little piece missing. It's been under moulded. Normally, if I was doing this kit, I'd put a bit of filler in there, but because we're just building it from the contents, and I'm not going to bother, I'll just put some red in there. You won't notice it when it's done. But I must admit, I am quite impressed with the fit. Apart from the cockpit interior, that didn't go in very well, but the rest of it seems to fit really nice. So I'll go ahead, glue the wings on, and I think we'll move on to the engine inlets on the side of the fuselage. I've glued the wings to the fuselage and they were a superb fit, I must admit. Really crisply moulded, so I didn't have any problems there. I've also put the engine inlets on. Again, they were a superb fit, got no issues with that. I've had to do some heavy sanding to the engine exhaust nozzle. This was quite badly moulded, but it's come up all right. And what I'm going to do is paint this again and then glue it on. I think I'm going to leave it there for this evening, let all the glue set properly, and then tomorrow we'll bang the landing gear on and I'll start painting the canopy. Right then, here's where we're at. Last night I finished painting the frame of the canopy. I must admit some of it's actually flaked off a little bit, but once again I didn't wash the part, so it's my own fault, but I can touch it up in a bit. I stuck the back portion of the canopy on to the fuselage. I've also painted the anti-glare black on the nose as well, and I've gone around and just touched up all the areas where I'd sanded just to get rid of the sprue marks on the plastic. What we're going to do now is we're going to glue the canopy on. For this I'm just going to use this polystyrene cement very sparingly, because if you use too much of this it can fog your canopy. Now normally, like I said, I use super glue, but never use super glue for do the canopy, otherwise it'll just turn white. But a few drops of this here and there and we should be all right. I mean, I had sort of lined it up quickly on the actual model, and you can actually still see the detail inside through the canopy, so that's a bonus. Right, I've put the canopy on. I did actually make a bit of a pig's ear of it, because when I was assembling it I got a little blob of glue on the inside, so I sort of had to remove it and just sort of did my best to scrape it off before it, because it sort of sets white and it looks quite obvious, but I think I just about got away with it. But it was a bit messy, but managed to do it. But I'll wait till that dries, wait till the canopy dries, and then we'll move on to the landing gear, touch the canopy up where the paint's come off, and then my favourite bit then is putting the decals on. Right, I've touched the canopy up. I'm just going to do the front portion of the frame black a little bit later on. I've stuck the landing gear on. Had no issues there, looks good. One thing I will say is that there is a bulged portion of the tyre on these wheels, to indicate obviously when there's weight on the tyres where the aircraft is on the ground, so you just got to make sure that you put the bulge at the bottom. Just a little tip there. I've just started putting the decals on. I'm having to wear rubber gloves because every time I touch the paint on this it goes quite tacky. I don't know if it's the oil in my fingers or whatever, but I'm having to wear some rubber gloves. But I've started putting the decals on, and this is my favourite bit now. This is where it really comes to life and it really starts to look like a proper little aeroplane. I will crack on. There's a few areas where I've got to touch various bits and pieces up, and I haven't put the antennas on or the pitot tube yet, but I'll leave that to last after the decals have been put on. Right then, I think that's us done. I've put the rest of the decals on, the two little antennas and the little pitot tube, that's on. I've finished touching up the various bits and pieces that I need to touch up. I've made a couple of mistakes, one of which being there's a blob of glue on the inside of the canopy. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to tell, but it's there and I notice it. But apart from that, I don't think I've done too bad of a job really, considering I've not touched a model kit in any way, shape or form in about 10 years, and it's one of these Airfix starter kits, so I've only used basically the bits and pieces that come with it. And that moves me neatly on to whether or not I would recommend one of these little starter kits to anyone, and the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, for $6.99, I mean it was a bargain anyway, but for $6.99 you get everything you need to complete the kit to a reasonable standard. Actually, I was quite surprised how reasonable it turned out. There were a couple of things I didn't like about it, one of which was there's a couple of undermoulded portions of the lower wing. If I hadn't been only using the bits and pieces that come with the kit, I'd have put some filler in there and you'd have never known the difference. The other thing I didn't like was the fact that this acrylic paint is quite difficult to handle. Even when I was using the gloves, to move the, hold the thing and move it around, it's still leaving little marks all over it. So I'm not sure whether it fully cured it. I mean, I left it for days, so it should have done really. It feels dry to the touch, but whether or not it's my sticky mitts on it, I don't know. But I wasn't overly keen on the acrylic paint, but it did do a reasonable job of covering the model, it has to be said, and it did turn out quite well, even though I do say so myself. I mean, I've not touched a model for about over 10 years, and I think you'll agree it did turn out pretty well, really. Not blowing my own trumpet. Don't forget, if you purchase one of these model kits, to, where are we, save your flying hours tokens, send them off to Models for Heroes. It's a very good cause. They will, of course, pass them on to Airfix in order to redeem free kits, etc. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video and you find it of some use and interest, please give it a big thumbs up. And if you're feeling that inclined, hit that subscribe button for more similar future content. Once again, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again very, very soon.